The Overwatch League offseason as well as free agency are about to start moving in full motion, and every single team is going to have their opportunity, as usual, to try and make upgrades, whether it be through trades or free agency, letting people go, whatever they need to do to try and better their situation. But what exactly are some of the focuses that these teams should be looking into to try and improve themselves or just change up their general situation? Well, that's what we're going to talk about and generally speculate with today in this video, as I'm going to give you my honest opinion on what I think every single team should be doing during this offseason, whether it be starting to rebuild, signing a specific player or two, addressing a certain position, or letting people go. I'm going to try and give you a brief rundown for all 20 teams. This kind of video is a fun way to kind of get the general speculation going for the community, but also it's a fun thing to look back on after free agency in the offseason ends to see how close this actually was to being what teams were trying to accomplish. Well, we got 20 teams to get through, so let's start mulling through this thing. And first up would be the Atlanta Reign. And coming into this recording session on November 11th, 2022, I thought the Reign had it all mapped out. They had a promising support line. You have Kai, you have Hawk, there was a good core to build around, even Speedily could have been exciting, but the Atlanta Reign apparently have other intentions as they dropped all of their DPS except for Kai, and they got rid of OG and Ultraviolet, so now the Reign are only left with a couple of players really. You have Hawk, Kai, and Vigilante. And who knows if any of those guys are staying for sure either. Atlanta are a total mess now, and I'm starting to wonder if they're maybe considering moving on to a brand new type of team. Maybe they're ready to start a Korean arc with new coaching and new everything. But for the sake of this video, let's just assume they're keeping those 4 guys that I just mentioned. Well, in that case, you first have to address that DPS line. Originally, I kind of wanted them to get another hit scan player, someone who could also play Tracer. You can pair him up with Kai and it'd be very nice, but now you also need a flex DPS on top of that, so this place is a big time mess. It might sound crazy, but maybe you try and convince Pelican to come back again. There is a way that it could happen. Or you know what? Maybe try getting Decay. He might be in the market. We don't really know what's going to happen with him and the Washington Justice, and I think him and Kai would get along quite well. You could have them in a hit scan Tracer meta, put up some serious damage, and Decay can also flex on to Genji and whatnot, so he could solve a lot of your problems with just him by himself. Or for a better idea, maybe try and get Decay and Assassin on your team, and then you pair them up with Vigilante, so you kind of have a somewhat Washington and Atlanta mixed core thing going on. That could be alright for you. When it comes to the main support position and who you pair Vigilante up if you intend to keep him, that's a bit more complicated, right? Maybe you want to have an English shot caller there, so you're not missing out in that regard if you're going to keep Kai and Hawk and people like that. Or you want to try and synergize better with Vigilante and go down the Korean route. Maybe you get a young player like Bliss from O2 Blast. Or you look towards Rain, who's back from his military service. He was good for the Valiant back in the day. You can go for a vet like Sanguinar, who used to be pretty good in this league. Maybe you could make a trade or just look for Animo if he's off the Florida Mayhem. I think that's a possibility. The Rain have options here, but I think that it's very questionable on what they want to do. Looking into the Boston Uprising, I think it's about time they move on from the guys who haven't developed a couple of years ago. You can maybe keep Punk, Crimzo, and Mag if you want to, but then I'd start fresh just about everywhere else. A good move on their end would be to promote their DPS prospect Arrow from Uprising Academy, and maybe sign the flex DPS Spectra from Korean contenders. Then follow it up with a longtime veteran like Slime, Sanguinar, or even FD God. No matter what their decision, I'd like to see them move on from Valentine and Faith. I think the WGS core experiment was a failure. They already got rid of their coach recently, so just hit the reset button. Those guys probably won't develop into anything. Now let's talk Chengdu Hunters, and for them, they've just got to hang on for dear life if I'm being honest with you. Do whatever you possibly can to try and hold on to Lee for another season. He's an MVP caliber player at his best, and I think so long as you have him, you can still build a decent product. I don't really know what Chengdu's financial situation is looking like, but building a budget roster around Leave could be a decent way to still be competitive. Because honestly, I fear of what Chengdu will be without him in a new era, so they gotta get this done. Whoever is cheap, you just hold on to them, I guess, then get rid of the rest. If not, you have to alternatively look to try and sell Leave, then look for a new star to add to the current roster. Either way, the Hunters have a lot of work cut out for them. Next, we have your Grand Finals champions, the Dallas Fuel, and they just have to do everything they can to keep that core together for another year to try and win another championship, but maybe you think about a few changes at DPS. You could maybe consider ditching Doha and Guerrillo for a more proven hit scan who can also play the Sombra. I know it's a long shot, but I'd love to see them go for Flora if he becomes a free agent. He had a down year in 2022, but he could probably do a lot better on a Dallas Fuel team that's way stronger than what he's had in the past. He's a solid hit scan, tracer, and Sombra, and would be an ideal rotational piece. Dallas should be going for guys that don't require a lot of development for the sake of trying to win that back-to-back title. And for Flora, I think he could fit the bill. The Florida Mayhem. What I'd like these guys to go out and do is maybe upgrade the main support position. I don't mind Animo, I've always liked him as a player, but he is on the passive side, and I think he did get outplayed a little bit in the playoffs towards the end, so I wouldn't mind seeing them go with someone that's, slightly more aggressive, and maybe a native English speaker as well for shot calling. That could likely help. Maybe go for OG now that he's a free agent. He left the Atlanta Reign. That could be a decent pickup. Everywhere else, though, Florida are pretty decent. They just need to develop more. Like, someone can basically fill out all of your tank needs on his own. He's insane. Hydron and someone are good starters. If you keep Exy, that might not be a bad idea. Give him another chance where he's in a better headspace. He'd make for a solid combo with Hydron for those specific metas. Or maybe there's a situation where Sojourn becomes less meta, and then you have Exy come in to be a stronger Widow or whatever it might be. The Mayhem could maybe consider bolstering that DPS line slightly more with like another flex option. Speedily, he might be a decent guy to have come off the bench, but in general, I like Checkmate and what he brings to the table. So I think if Florida maybe just slightly address that DPS situation and they get a new main support, they'll be in decent shape. The Guangzhou Charge. So the big thing that I think this team really needs to do is try and hold on to all of their mid-season pickups from the 2022 season. Piggy was a fantastic pickup for them, and he's a great person to lead your team around. And then I also really appreciated the efforts of Jimmy and believe that a Parita could be a great long-term option. So what it really comes down to is maybe upgrading your flex support position a little bit and getting another tank so Piggy doesn't have to flex onto everything by himself. I think that's where you go from here. Maybe a nice trade for Mag or for Muse wouldn't be a terrible idea. A natural Winston and Rhine player. Or, if you look at flex support, I think that Faraway, while not bad this year, it just is probably one of the weaker points of their team, and I think they'd benefit from a more explosive option here. Imagine if they traded for, like, Monk from Chengdu, for example. Monk has previous experience with Xerneas, so they would have good synergy. If not, surely you could find a solid option in Chinese contenders right now. There's plenty of people to go around over there. I doubt a lot of people are going to be signing Chinese flex supports, so Guangzhou are going to have their pick there for certain. Maybe you do hold on to Faraway, but then have that other option just in case. The Charge could do a lot of things here, which is really exciting because they're finally heading in the right direction. The Hangzhou Spark will be up next, and there's two things I'd like to see them do. Ideally, I'd want to see them make a power move for Leave. They have the money probably to get him, and I think pairing him up with Shy would just be ridiculous and arguably one of the best DPS duos in the entire world. But if that's not realistic, they should at least consider adjusting that tank line. Bernard just wasn't that impressive this year, and while Gouchway did okay to end this year, he's mostly just there for Winston and could end up retiring at any moment for all we know. If he doesn't end up re-signing with the Charge, I'd love to see them look into Piggy, as he would be a solid addition to this Spark team. He'd give them a lot more playmaking potential, and he'd complement Shy nicely in my eyes. Or if you prefer a Chinese shot caller, then you just go to contenders immediately, as you're going to be one of the only teams that will be interested in that region, just like always, so you're definitely going to have your picks. Either way, the Spark tank situation is far from satisfactory and could use some additional help. The Houston Outlaws. For them, they have to do whatever is within reason to convince Pelican to stay. He might be more interested now after a top 3 finish in the playoffs, but in general, he did seem pretty upset when they got rid of Piggy during last year, and he might want to reunite with him somewhere, so I would not hold my breath, and I'd be preparing to focus on flex DPS hard in the case that he does go. Maybe they could try a trade for Yaki, or to acquire Heesang or Spectra out of Korean contenders. But the Outlaws should also consider snagging an additional support. I mean, they kind of have to at this point. They got rid of the only other supports they had aside from Lastro, so they need a new flex support unless Lastro goes back to that position. But either way, you're going to need a main support or a flex support at the starting role, plus a backup for those double flex support composition situations, and maybe even another tank, to be honest with you. A backup to Dante would not be a bad idea, especially so he can play like the Sigma and other things that's maybe out of his comfort zone. The London Spitfire are up next, and I'd look to complete that DPS line. As I'm recording this, I found out that Sparker is entering free agency, which is not ideal. You definitely want to bring him back if at all possible, but then also you need a backup probably, since Shax may not be an ideal person to keep on your team, since his flexibility is definitely lacking. Maybe if Sparker doesn't come back, you try and make a trade for Kai, let's say. You need another powerhouse starting hit scan so you don't lose what you had last year, but also you need a backup hit scan arguably. Maybe somebody who can play Tracer like Shax, but would be more useful in a double sniper composition. London's DPS line could be really good, especially if they bring back Sparker, but it could be a little better by filling in a few missing holes, but that's assuming Sparker comes back. They could end up being in trouble at this specific position. Another move that might not be that bad, whether he'd be the starter or a backup, would be to sign Shockwave, the former DPS of the Vancouver Titans and Philly Fusion, as he's been looking pretty darn good over in Contenders since his Vancouver release, and would make for a solid addition to an EU-based roster like this. Taking a look into the LA Gladiators, they need to add more depth at DPS. As the season went on, it was pretty obvious that they were getting exposed for a lack of flexibility. You need to find another flex, like Patty Pan, to fill the void. Additionally, maybe consider moving on from Happy, who may not be the greatest scheme fit on this roster. I know it may sound crazy, but you could try pursuing somebody like Lip. He looks hungry to win another title, and I would not be surprised if he hits free agency this offseason or if the Dragons look to shop him. Him and Kevster together just sounds disgusting. Either that, or it has to be one of the top-rated guys out of Contenders. The Glads are in championship or bust territory with this core. We don't know how much longer it can last, so they need guys who can perform right now. The LA Valiant. While the Valiant could use a little more star power everywhere if they stick with this core, it would be in their best interest to maybe look into a new tank and support, as there's a solid chance they don't hold on to Marvel as a mid-season pickup, and they get rid of Sashin as well because he's mostly just good at Zarya. So I think it might be time for LA to get a new flex tank who can be a full-time starter that fills all of their needs. If he were to continue his trend of joining and leaving new teams, I could genuinely see Hoppa joining this team as a decent fit. He's a flexible player and a proven leader. Or maybe Gaga becomes a free agent, or League, the former two-way player of the Hangzhou Spark. He's been looking pretty alright in Contenders. All I know is the Valiant have options if they intend to keep this team how it is. It's just a matter of picking somebody instead of doing absolutely nothing, you know? Hopefully it's within their budget to get an okay option. If they add more money, I'd be begging them to recruit Leave or someone along those lines, but we all know they don't have that in them, so it's best to keep the expectations set to a minimum. Next, we have the NYXL, and I want to see them burn this all to the ground. It's clear that they do not have what it takes with their current core. Their current team is just absolutely boomed without a shadow of a doubt, and I would not be surprised if a lot of their players wanted to leave. Maybe it's time for a new era in New York. Maybe think about going fully Western, or taking a chance on more Contenders talent. There's a lot of hungry players out there from all regions that you could take a chance on. New York usually aren't shy with spending a decent bit, so surely they could offer some big names some decent money. All I know is, things just can't stay this way. From my point of view, it just doesn't seem worth it to try again with this particular group based on the results. If you're gonna try again, then you'd need more tank presence and better coaching. The team had absolutely zero discipline last year, and it shows through their lack of flexibility and poor decision making. They need a lot of help if they want to try this again. The Paris Eternal. I think they should try and beef up that tank line just a little bit. From what I've heard, Paris fully intend to stick with the product that we saw at the end of 2022. And if we look at that roster from top to bottom, they lack a lot of depth at the tank position. I see at least some promise with people like Dove and Rack Attack and whatnot, but tank was a real struggle for them. Crawley just got overwhelmed a lot. It could just be a team thing, but even then, it probably does not hurt to have somebody who's more accustomed to playing the main tank hero, so to speak. It would be beneficial for a young and raw team like this to have a rotation depending on composition and map type, seeing as they could end up losing a lot of games again this year, and they probably want to have options so they don't feel so stuck. And if you want to stick with this youth movement, so to speak, you could go for Doge, formerly of the Houston Outlaws. Or maybe you look towards contenders. I mean, my boy Gig has been winning a lot of games on Redbird Esports. Or perhaps you reunite with BenBest, you know? You have your choices. Take your pick. You could probably get any of these guys for relatively cheap. Next will be the Philadelphia Fusion, and genuinely, I want Philly to address their support situation. I know that Carpe is rumored to be going to the Valorant scene, so you technically need a backup at DPS now, but I think it's more important for this team to address the holes in their starting lineup, which means they should be looking towards the support position. AimGod and Fixa, they were kind of just inconsistent, you know? Fixa in particular struggled big time at certain moments throughout the season with his decision making. He was one of the more unreliable main supports in the league, and Philly could do a lot better, especially if they're looking to upgrade and win now. It's kind of like a low-key signing, but my boy Rain, formerly of the LA Valiant, is back from his military service. He was really solid back in the day in 2020. He could help a lot in terms of consistency if he's able to maintain his form, but you could also go with Sanguinar. Hell, even Lee Jae Gon could be available for the right price. The Fusion definitely have options, and the support line needs to be addressed in some way. They can't just sit there and do nothing. If they want to get better, I think it's time that they replace Fixa or have him learn under the bench for a year. The San Francisco Shock. I think the answer to this one is pretty simple, boys. It's time to build your team more around Proper and get him a bit more help. And this is especially the case now that they have gotten rid of all of their tank players as well as Sam and Striker. They need a couple of starting caliber players now. We'll talk about tank in a minute because I wanted to start with the DPS. So I mean, for starters, while I didn't mind Sam and Striker, it was pretty clear that they needed something a bit more. I mean, even Kilo is inconsistent and they're keeping him. I just feel like they need a good 1-2 punch with Proper right now. Sam was mostly just good for specific metas, and Striker was obviously just a temporary thing to help try and put them over the top for a quick championship. Under different circumstances, if the Shock were still in rebuild mode, I could maybe see them holding on to Sam, but you're kind of in win now mode after getting so close. They're one map away, so if they get a bit more help for Proper, they could probably go all the way. So it's time to try and make a move at that DPS spot. When it comes to the tank position, I'm a little surprised they were so willing to get rid of Kaluj because he was really good, but at the same time, I do understand why the Shock would maybe want to start fresh here. They can finally just go full Korean and not have to worry about having a Western player on the roster. It could help with their communication. I think that having one of their O2 blast tanks, if not both of them, would be really beneficial. You could pick up both Max and Junbin from your academy team. They have that synergy already with Proper and Kilo. It would be a big time move that could probably make this team a bit more cohesive. Next, let's talk about the Seoul Dynasty though, and their main objective has to be that support line. A side thing could maybe be trying to upgrade over Fitz, which is a lot easier said than done, but like I was talking about earlier in the video, what if Lip becomes available? Could you imagine if Seoul had Prophet and Lip? That sounds pretty insane. Anyway, I think that support has to be the big thing to look at though, because while Vindame did great, I think having a natural flex support on the team for those double flex support metas would go a long way, and that is assuming they keep Iris, of course. And it's not like Iris fills out all of your needs anyway, especially with like Zenyatta, for example, which is why I'd love to see this team get Jonek back in there after he took a year off. I'm sure he's looking pretty motivated again, and he'd make for a sick addition. He'd solve a lot of their problems in my eyes. But another good option would be trying to either trade or sign Vigilante. I wouldn't doubt it if him and or Atlanta end up parting ways with one another, so I think the Dynasty making a move for him would be pretty nice and would give this backline a lot of youth and potential. The Dynasty overall are in relatively good shape, so if they just make a move or two, they're going to be sitting pretty for sure. The Shanghai Dragons. Honestly, it's really hard to tell what these guys should do for once, as there's a solid chance most of their team either retires or leaves according to the rumors. So either A, you go total rebuild mode and look towards what the Shock did last year, or B, you go all in on Lip and maybe convince Lee Jae Gon to stay if all of those rumored retirements do come true. Maybe you could even go all out by spending big bucks on guys like Yaki and Mag, as well as the biggest names that Contenders has to offer. It's a tough choice to make for sure, but the Dragons have to choose wisely. The Toronto Defiant. For once, they actually have a core, and I don't actually see them building a completely new roster. I think it's time to convince Hisu, Chorung, and Twilight to stay for another year. They're all star players in their own right and could help build a playoff contender. The big goal now, though, has to be to upgrade flex DPS and tank. The obvious move to make is to go for Yaki. That's one a lot of people have been talking about. He almost came to play for you last year, and you have the big bucks to make a trade happen, so you might need to let that fly. On paper, at least, he's going to solve a lot of the inconsistency issues posed by Although and Finale. Also, Hisu and Yaki are former teammates who could wreak havoc on the rest of the league. In theory, I think that the two of them could finally have a reliable DPS partner in crime again. Then with Tank, I'd like to see them keep Papa, as he honestly looked pretty decent this year, and then maybe make a trade for Mag. It would be pretty sick if the Defiant got that Contenders runaway core back together. You know, Hisu, Yaki, Mag. They used to do some great things together back in the day. I think in general, though, this Defiant team is in a decent position if they keep their main trio, and they could end up in a really decent spot in 2023 if they make the right moves. Hopefully they don't screw this up. The Vancouver Titans. Well, for starters, there's a couple of obvious things. They have a hole at head coach and main support after parting ways with Deepay and Masa retiring and everything. In terms of coach, I'd love to see them go for Get Amazed, you know, that former coach of the Paris Eternal in 2021 that turned them into a decent team and developed their talent really quickly. I think on a young team with a lot of unknowns like Vancouver, he could be a great fit. At the main support end, I could totally see them going for a low-end option like Lep, who had a few decent moments on the Houston Outlaws, or better yet, you could go for FD God. He was really good back in the day on the Paris Eternal, and he is looking to get back into the league, and he probably deserves a tryout at the very least. But also, the Titans may need a new tank player. I think somebody with main tank experience is probably preferred. Mir ended up being a pretty decent option for them, but they do need somebody who can play Winston and Rhine, among other things. They couldn't play a lot of these standard compositions at a competent level, especially early on when they were trying to force it. Imagine if they got like FD God and Benbest to reunite that former French representation from the Eternal. Or maybe somebody like Mikey even after how he played in the finals. The Titans have options at their disposal, I just don't know how much money they're looking to spend. That's the scary thing. The Washington Justice. Honestly, I don't have a remote clue what these guys are thinking. For the longest time, it seemed like they were pretty set on going budget mode. They don't trust where the Overwatch League is going, so they don't want to spend a lot. But now here in the offseason, we've seen posts from both Decay and Calio saying while they are looking for a team, they are also technically still negotiating with the Justice, so maybe they're not actually ready to give up on this Decay-led core. If I'm the Justice, you might want to consider this. Decay is a talented player, and I'm sure with a couple of new additions, you could be right back in the thick of it. Maybe get a new tank player of some sort. I don't really know who exactly is available for them. Maybe you look towards contenders. Maybe you try and get like Hoppa. If he's available, Muse, if he doesn't retire from Toronto Defiant, could be a decent fit. There are options in that regard, but they also need to upgrade their support line big time. I mean, the way it is right now, it's just not good enough. But if I'm the Justice, honestly, I just hit the reset button. It's clear that this core is not going to win you a championship. You've tried for a couple of years now, and they have continuously disappointed, so I think it's time to just move on. So what the Justice need to try and do now during the offseason is shop any other big names that are still remaining on their roster, like Assassin, for example, if he's under contract still. There's maybe a guy or two on here you could make a decent sum of money off of, and then you can flip said money into some cheap deals for that ideal budget roster that the Justice are clearly trying to build. Or maybe you could try and hold on to Krillin and Kalios, who looked okay, and then pick up some low-end options and potential diamonds in the rough to stay Korean. Or alternatively, you could go fully American. That would kind of fit the Justice theme, I'd say. Or you could try and sign the boys that all ended up on Team Peps and are former Overwatch League players. Logix, Benbest, Naga, FD God, maybe plus Get Amazed as the coach. Whatever the Justice do, it's likely going to catch criticism, and I'm not expecting them to spend a lot of money by any means. Aside from that, that's all I basically have to say on the Justice, so that wraps up all 20 teams and what I think they should be looking to try and do during this offseason. It's never easy to tell who's going to come, who's going to go, who's looking to upgrade big time, who's looking to rebuild. But from like a general standpoint, I kind of expect to see a decent bit of retirements, especially for some of those old heads. And then additionally, teams like the Justice, Dragons, and NYXL, among others, could be looking to rebuild. But then you also have to look at some of the big names like LA Gladiators, San Francisco Shock, Toronto Defiant. They're accustomed to making big moves during the offseason. They usually do that. So you have to watch those teams and a couple of others very, very carefully. This offseason is going to be a very interesting one for the simple fact that this is the first year where teams won't be going blind into Overwatch 2. There's no theory crafting in what they need. Now they have a general idea, so things are going to look a bit more organized, I'd say. So for that, there's a lot of wildcard things that could happen with some major moves, and I'm expecting a lot of my outlooks / predictions, I guess you could say, to be very, very wrong, but I guess we'll see soon enough. This offseason is going to be a crazy one, baby. You definitely want to stick around this channel if you're new and you want to stay up to date with all things Overwatch League offseason news related. I make lots of recap videos throughout these long offseason months that highlight all of the biggest news that you need to be aware of, as well as breaking news videos that cannot wait. So if you're new here, you definitely want to hit the subscribe button and enable notifications by clicking that bell so you don't miss out on any of the most recent news that's going down. And of course, if you enjoyed today's offseason video and you want more just like it, be sure to hit that like button and leave a comment down below of what your favorite team needs to try and do during this offseason. I would love to hear your opinion. But until the next offseason video, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.